And we're back with another episode of Franchise My Business, the podcast for franchisors, hosted by franchisors. I'm your host, Kevin Oldham, and this episode is going to be applicable to anybody in business. It's not just for franchisees, franchisors. It's for everybody. And the timing of this, I think, is perfect because I'm recording this on Monday, August 7th. I have just concluded a period of time, basically going back to June, but definitely over the past 2 weeks where I've not been in the office. I have been focused on my family and balancing business and family. And so this is going to be a pretty impactful episode because I'm really benefiting from a couple of things that are allowing me to have a little bit more, I don't really like the word balance, but blend and managing different buckets in life. But first of all, I want to use the analogy. And maybe we can pull it up in post-production here, an image. But I know that there was a talk by a professor, you could probably go Google it, where he's giving his students, he's got physical stuff out there, right? So he's got small little pebbles, and then he's got big rocks, and he's got like a bowl. And he starts putting in all the pebbles, and all the pebbles represent all the things like all the notifications that are happening on your phone, just all the things that are not important, okay? Let's just call it that. Pumping gas, whatever, all the stuff. And then the big rocks are the important things. The rocks are things like, for me, my family, my martial arts practice, skateboarding, my team, businesses, just like all these things. These are all the important things, right? And if you try to do things by putting in all the pebbles first, then put on the rocks, a lot of times there's not enough room for the rocks. But if you put the rocks in first and you put the pebbles in, generally they'll fill in the gaps and everything works. Okay. And so the rocks are, in my world, are my family. Okay. They are they are the reason that that I do everything that I do on a daily basis. They're the reason, and the reason I say that is they're the reason I started my marketing company 8 years ago. They're the reason that I do a lot of the things that I do and the way that I do them, because I'm a dad, because I am a son, because I am a husband. I have so many different roles. I have a brother. I have a lot of people that I want to be proud of the things that I do professionally, but also I want them to know in the pecking order where they are in terms of importance and impact in life. And I think that if you were to ask my family, my children, anybody who is in my family, they would tell you that my family is the most important thing in my life. And I'm pretty proud of that. And so here's how I've been able to manage that. And to put it in perspective, because people look at me and they ask how I get things done. The reality is I don't work more than 40 to 45 hours a week. And here are my business holdings. So I have a digital marketing company. We've got 10 team members there. So there's some complexity associated with that business. That business is de facto, and it has been up and running for 8 years. I've got the Smoothie Shop and Supplements franchise system, and we've got a supplement company. We've got Smart Agent Life, which is a kind of residual real estate business. I've got my podcast, Franchise My Business. That's a project. And those are all the work things that are vying for my attention from a quote unquote work perspective. I actually don't think of any of it as work. It's all play and fun, but it falls into that work bucket because I'm not doing it with my family. Okay. And so people look at me and they're like, dude, how do you manage it all? And here's how. Number one, it hasn't always been like that. There have definitely been periods in my entrepreneur journey, which is we're heading into like our ninth year of it, where there was not balance, where I definitely was spending too much time on work, particularly as my children were younger. And I specifically think back to, I think it was probably August or September of 2015, like literally right after we started our marketing consultancy. I remember my wife and I had this moment. Like, she was literally frustrated because of how much I was working, and also not only how much I was working, but the mood it was putting me in. It was putting me in a bad mood. And I still remember my wife saying something along the lines of, hey, if this is what being an entrepreneur is like for Kevin, maybe you should go get a job. Like she was pretty, and I had some soul searching as well. I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like I've got to fix this. This is not sustainable. I will crash the proverbial plane, the plane being me and potentially our family. And our kids were so young, they didn't know what the heck was going on. But my wife definitely noticed. And so I still remember I went down into the basement. I have a idea paint. It's like the whiteboard paint that goes on your wall. And I mapped out what the solution was going to be. And I course corrected very quickly. But that was a scary period where I had this moment with my spouse around how things were way out of balance, like way out of kilter. And a lot of that had to do with just starting a brand new business, but it was ugly, and I'll always remember it, and it does help me stay balanced. Other things, use this example of the past couple of weeks. So I had one of those, actually both of those weeks where connectivity for me was not optimal, or I was in scenarios where I wasn't checking my phone a lot. One of them was I went to this camp called Centric Kid. It's a Christian camp for kids, and I went with my son, and so I was responsible for a bunch of boys ages like going into 4th through 6th grade. They're not little kids, but they still need some leadership and mentorship. And we actually stayed in dorms together and all this stuff. And so I was highly focused on these kids. And what I did to make it so that I could have a week where I was basically focused on helping these kids connect on their faith journey, what I did was I set up a system and expectation setting ahead of time for that week, not only with my clients, but also with my team members, right? And basically made it so that I could disappear and somebody was covering the most important things that needed to get done that fell in my area of responsibility while I was, helping these kiddos out for the week, right? And so having a team is one of those things that really helps with balance. I have no shortage of people that support me when I'm gone. So the past 2 weeks, I've not really been in Kansas City at our office. I've been engaged in work and I've been 100% accessible for one of those weeks, but my team also knew that I was spending time with family and or I was with these kids at church camp or whatever, and that I wanted to really focus on those things. And I was still accessible. And I think as a business owner, you never really get to check out 100%. You can for sure. I'm probably not the type who ever wants to do that. And so I was accessible on Slack. We use Slack to communicate intercompany so that if I was a roadblock or information that I had was a roadblock, somebody could just Slack me real quick. We could clear the roadblock and then execute. In today's world of connectivity, probably the biggest challenge, I think, for all of us is our mobile phones. So I can put on something like, hey, out of office autoresponder on my email, but we don't have that option on text messaging. And I think there was one scenario that came up, a prospective client of our marketing consultancy sent me a text and called. And this is somebody I haven't talked to in 7-8 months and said, hey, blah, 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 let's connect. And I'm like, what did I do right there? I sent him a text back. I said, hey, I'm out of the office. I'm on vacation with my family in Western Kansas. Can't wait to visit with you. Here's my Calendly link. Just grab the first available appointment that makes sense for you. Boom. 30 seconds, not a big deal. But those are just some of the things that, which make me believe that you really can just never turn things off, because there will always be people who text. There will always be people who send Facebook messages. And that's probably one of the most challenging things is all these ways that people have access to us make it so that you can't always put somebody in charge of that communication channel like you can with email. You can have an autoresponder and say, hey, reach out to fill in the blank. They'll take excellent care of you. If it's an emergency, call or text me. Okay. So I think the biggest thing that I have when you're gone for prolonged periods of time is just setting up rules and expectations with team members and stakeholders. So let's talk about the day-to-day. The day-to-day, I pride myself on the fact that I'm generally home in the mornings when my kiddos take off for school or whatever it is, get their day started. A couple times a week when school's in session, I'm home when they get home from school, which sometimes is pretty early in the afternoon, I think 4 p.m. and I'll be there when the kids come home, coordinate with my wife. Even if it's just to high five the kids before they go out the back door to hang out with their friends, and then I'll just like hop back to work or whatever. But I'm there in case they need something, grab a hug, tell them how much I love them, pour into them a little bit, and then we'll reunite as a family around dinner time or whatever. And so I think the biggest thing is like just figuring out what the cadence is for your family, for your life. For me, my kids are younger. They're in elementary and middle school ages. And so they're very social. They have a lot of friends and all these different variables that come and go with each season in life. And I'm just a chameleon who is taking my body of work and fitting it into those changing dynamics. Because one of the things that I am acutely aware of is that this season of life is not forever. My children will not be small forever. They'll be bigger. They'll move on and whatnot. And I think self-awareness is probably the other thing, is being aware of a season of life, being aware of if something's permanent, if it's a couple years, if it's just a temporary thing, and then adapting your work into it and making sure that your team members know about it. And that's really the success factor, I think, is having team members that you can rely on, that if you set up a set of rules for when you're going to be gone, and you also set up rules and expectations for when you work, when you don't work, the stakeholders, whether they're franchisees, whether they're customers or whatever, they start to figure out what your cadence is. And I think that everybody understands that everybody has a family, and that nobody hardly in this world today is just working just to work. We're all working for something greater than that. But it could be a greater cause, purpose, whatever it is, family, all of those things. And I think that COVID actually helped that. I think that COVID helped people understand that life is a blend. It is not this black and white thing. And if we go back to the old industrial complex and everything, when they didn't have mobile phones, yep, you clocked out at 5 p.m. and you didn't think about work, and then you went back the next day and you clocked back in. Connectivity has made it so that's just not reality anymore. And so you've got to figure out what works for you, what works for you, what works for the people that you serve, all the stakeholders in your life, and most importantly, what works for your family. What works for your family. And then I think that if you work with what are the rocks that you have to think about in relation to your family, and then work backwards, then you're going to be good to go. And so I'm going to leave you with one final example. And this is a hilarious one. This show's about entrepreneurship at its core. So I have a 4 p.m. recurring meeting on my calendar on Mondays. And it says Landon Poop Patrol. So our son's name is Landon. And he has his first business is he's got a micro business. He picks up dog poop. He's got a couple different yards, and those yards they're not super far apart, mile and a half away, right? During the school year, so that he can maximize his time with his buddies, I will actually leave work early, and I will pick him up, and I will take him to the various yards, okay, and support his entrepreneurship business. I'll drive him around. And so that's like this recurring meeting that I have where I know on Mondays at 4 p.m., unless him and I say otherwise, I'm going to be supporting him. And so I leave work, and my whole team knows every Monday at 4 p.m., I'm dad out driving him around to support his small business, because for me, that's a hell yes. For him, it's something that he finds very valuable, and it's frankly time we get to spend together. And we talk about his business during that time. It's actually pretty cool. So I get to mentor my budding entrepreneur. Until next time, I'm your host, Kevin Oldham, and just 2 asks. Number 1, would love it if you subscribe. Number 2, would love it if you left a review. Until next time, I hope you have a phenomenal week, and be well.